Shalom and welcome everyone to this week's ICEJ webinar. We're so glad you've joined us. I'm coming to you from our TV studios in Jerusalem, here at the global headquarters of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. And we just had a ceasefire about a week ago in the U.S. and Israeli war against Iran, and swallowed up the whole region over the past 6 weeks or so. And just as suddenly, we've now had talks, direct talks between Israel and Lebanon on this sort of separate front of this war, which came around suddenly, unexpectedly. But we're going to focus on that this week. What can we expect out of these talks? Will Iran and Hizbullah be able to thwart a peace deal between Israel and Lebanon? Or will the Lebanese people themselves finally get to decide their own future and their own fate? That's our topic this week here on the webinar. And to help us really delve into this is our friend IDF Major Elliot Chadoff. It's good to see you, Elliot.
Good to be back.
Yeah, we haven't had you in a little while. When things were quieter, we didn't have much to talk about, but now that we've got a war and a ceasefire and peace talks, especially sort of a specialty area of yours, you're still in the IDF Home Front Command for the North. You've been in the IDF for 35 years, written field manuals, training manuals, and sort of specialized on Hezbollah especially. We want to turn to you now to help us understand what's going on in Lebanon, a very important front, and I think overall a good development for Israel, these talks. But first of all, we've had 6 weeks of fighting after the U.S. and Israel struck in Iran. The next day, Hezbollah started firing. That front heated up again. And you're just about 7-8 miles from the border with Lebanon. How's it been over the past 6 weeks or so for y'all up there?
It's been stressful. We're actually, we live in the kind of overlap between the Iranian ballistic missiles that were fired at Haifa and the Hizbullah rockets that are fired out of Lebanon. So we were essentially catching alerts from both directions, sometimes simultaneously. But it's stressful. We lost a lot of sleep over it because 2 a.m. alert and then a 3 a.m. and then a 4 a.m. So things have quieted down a bit. There was a nearby rocket attack this morning, that was intercepted. So it's not over, but the intensity has dropped significantly over the past week.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because for 6 weeks, while the war was on Iran, the Israeli army had its attention divided between the Lebanon front and the Iranian front. It was very important fighting with the U.S. over there to get the job done as quick as you could, because there could always be ceasefire at President Trump's decision, and Israel was sort of dependent on that. But it sort of robbed the Lebanese front, the Hezbollah front, from IDF's attention. But did it shift a little over the past week, or did it intensify, or is it not you say it's quieter?
Okay, no, it's quieter, first of all, because the Iranians haven't been firing for the past week.
Yes.
And Hezbollah is under pressure. I think there's a sequence here. We can start with the recent one, but it goes back, that it's not so much that the IDF was divided between Iran and Hezbollah as much as the Air Force was, because yes. The operation in Iran had very little to do with the ground forces. There were special operations groups operating in there, and that's not a secret. But the ground force, the brigades, the armor, the regular infantry, obviously were not in Iran. And Hezbollah stepped into it, basically, on the day after the attacks began on Iran, almost unavoidably. I say almost, I think that had Hassan Nasrallah still been alive, he might have been able to wriggle his way out from under it. Naim Qassem did not have that capability, but their inclination in any event would be to go in because Hizbullah is really part of Iran. It's very commonly misrepresented as a proxy. Hamas is a proxy. Hizbullah was established by the Khomeini government. It's an arm of the Khomeiniist government, today Khamenei Jr., and they really have no means of existence if the Iranian regime goes under. So they're kind of stuck with that. And having been seriously weakened in the rounds going back to the aftermath of October 7th, and in the last operations that were ended pretty much summarily by an imposed American ceasefire, IDF in general, IDF Northern Command in particular, were preparing for this essentially to continue the operations that were going on earlier. So when Hezbollah started firing, this was an opportunity to go in and continue the job, not necessarily finish it. We'll talk about how it can finish, but continue the job. The result is that Hezbollah has a decreasing rocket launch capability over time, greatly reduced from their original capability. And here, before October 7th, we know that their doctrine, and they had the capability to do this, was to fire 4,000 rockets a day into Israel. And the numbers varied. The official estimate was that they had 250,000 rockets. My estimate put them between 300 and 350, but it doesn't matter. We're over 250,000 rockets and 4,000 a day. Today, they have been sufficiently degraded that if they can fire 20 or 30, it's a lot. And that's well within the capability of the Iron Dome to intercept them. So there's a combination here of fewer rockets on the one hand, and because there are fewer rockets, better interception capability overall. So that's part of part of the explanation of why things are much quieter today than they were even a month ago.
Yeah, but in 2006, the Second Lebanon War, there were around 1,000 rockets a day, and they were these Katyushas spiked with nails and ball bearings, really deadly anti-personnel rockets. And we thought 4 times worse. So there's 2 escalations now with Hezbollah, 2 months in October, November of 2024. And now this one, and I guess Israel managed to destroy a lot of their rockets before they could ever fire them.
Yes, well, the destruction of their rockets started in a gradual campaign that began after October 7th that reached its zenith, if you will, or its break point with the famous Beeper operation, and followed by an extended operation into Lebanon. We withdrew for the most part as a result of the ceasefire. We've gone back into areas that we had taken and cleared out in that operation and found that they had managed to get rockets and other weapons back in violation of the ceasefire. I can't say I'm terribly surprised. What we've done now is pushed them, for all intents and purposes, north of the Litani River, in other words, out of what is generally referred to as South Lebanon. There's a major battle concluding now. I think we're in the final days of it in the town of Bin Jbel, where a very large Hezbollah force was apparently organizing for an attack to launch an attack into Israel. In other words, a mini October 7th, 2.0. And we surrounded them there. We've killed dozens in the process, some trying to escape, some in the fighting, and that's being reduced. Some of the fire that we're seeing into Israel is coming out of Bin Jbel under what I call, the U.S. military refers to this in their own doctrine as use 'em or lose 'em. They're in a position that if they don't fire those rockets, they're not going to have them in another few days. So we're seeing some of that, but for the most part, their rocket capability has been driven northward. And what that means is that their short-range rockets can't reach the same places that they could reach before all of this. So, for example, my community is out of range of short-range rockets fired from north of the Litani.
Yeah. Now, you said that
yes.
The IDF ground forces were operating in there. It was just the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, that had its attention divided for the 6 weeks of almost
Correct.
6 weeks of the war in Iran. But some of these soldiers were telling the media, we're here in Lebanon to drive the rockets back and to
Yes.
so that they direct their rockets at us and not at the civilians. And some of the parents of these soldiers says, wait a minute, they don't have any air cover. The Air Force should be there with them. But that sort of has changed now. They got better air support over the last week.
Okay, so first of all, even that's a bit incorrect, because a portion, the primary support that the Air Force provides to the ground troops in Lebanon is attack helicopter support, Apache attack helicopters. Mm-hmm. They weren't involved in the Iran operation either. That's way beyond their range. So there were also not the entire Air Force, and again, there are a whole bunch of reasons for this, planning as well as logistics. It wasn't like the entire Air Force was constantly flying in Iran. Mm-hmm. There were aircraft committed to supporting the ground forces. There were aircraft committed to striking targets. The stepping up against Hizbullah and the large operation that we saw immediately after the ceasefire was declared in Iran was the commitment of a massive airstrike against Hizbullah leaders. That, of course, the world is saying the genocide of Lebanon and that sort of thing, because which is nonsense, but a major portion of the Air Force was able to be committed to simultaneously strike dozens upon dozens of targets in Lebanon. Let's also keep in mind that's not just aircraft. An operation on that scale requires an enormous amount of planning and coordination. And I won't say it's impossible, but it's very difficult for an Air Force staff to run two operations on that scale simultaneously. And if they can opt not to, and they did opt not to, so much the better. The Iran air operation was incredible in its planning, coordination, logistics. Now they can refocus and go after Hezbollah targets. But the targets that are being hit, or had been hit, because now it's pretty much reduced for a number of reasons, had no direct impact on the ground operations in South Lebanon. These were more strategic targets. They have an effect on the organization. Obviously, weakening the organization works to everybody's benefit. But the terrorists who are trapped in Binchbel are not affected by the bombing of a Hezbollah headquarters in Beirut.
Yeah, let's run through this again, because the IDF is saying it's as successful and big an operation as the Beeper operation a couple of years ago, that they knew where Hezbollah had moved their command centers from South Beirut, Dahia, because it was getting hit so much over the recent years and during this war, that they moved up into North Lebanon in the Christian and Sunni Arab neighborhoods, knew where they were, had all these planned. And Elliot, wasn't it that, you mentioned whether the new leader of Hezbollah, whether he would decide whether to go in? Isn't it the case that Iran had sent some of the Revolutionary Guard, some of the Quds Force commanders to Beirut to take full command of the situation, to make sure Hezbollah joined in this war, and they were some of the victims of this operation?
Absolutely. So first of all, let's understand that Hezbollah is actually a branch of the Quds Force of the IRGC. That's a very important point that is often missed in the commentary and analysis in the West.
They're not a proxy, they're an extension of the... Iranian army.
They're more than an extension. When Soleimani was taken out in the first Trump administration, he was the head of Quds Force. Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hizbullah, was offered the job. That's not something you give to an outsider. He was considered an insider. Nasrallah had studied in Khomeini's schools. This is not just a marriage of convenience. They are truly an extension. Now, what happened is that after Nasrallah was eliminated and his successor was eliminated, and the leadership, and of course we're talking about tier after tier after tier of leadership, the current head of Hezbollah, and this is a bit of a digression, but I think it's an important one, Naim Qassem, I consider him to be the most unfortunate terrorist leader in the world. For an interesting reason. Naim Qassem was the number 2 in Hezbollah from the very, very beginning of the organization, and he was always considered to be inadequate to be the leader. He was always passed over for leadership until there was nobody left. And so now he's the leader of Hezbollah, and he's not on anybody's hit list. You'll notice that we've taken out waves of leaders, including this last operation last week, and he's not on the list. And I say this tongue-in-cheek, but with a certain amount of seriousness. Can you imagine waiting decades to become the head of the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world, and nobody wants to take you out?
Is he a spy, or is he just that weak that you want to leave him in place?
He's just that. He's so bad, he's so weak that strategically taking him out would be to a disadvantage, because anybody who replaces him has got to be better for them.
You got to stop here. I almost had a pang of sympathy for him. So please, let's move on.
Okay. No, but it also, all of that, by the way, everything I said was true, even though it was expressed tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
It also shows the weakness of the organization, the importance of the Quds Force, IRGC people to be in Beirut, because Hezbollah is no longer capable of fully commanding itself independently. And this is a great opportunity, coming to where we are today in terms of Israel-Lebanon. Tremendous opportunity. The job isn't done yet, but we have made tremendous progress over the past year and over the past month in driving Hezbollah into a corner.
Yeah, at one point, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah for all those years, he was so charismatic in Arab and Iranian circles, and he was the most popular figure in the Arab world at one point. There were people making songs about him until he started destroying Lebanon, and he became very unpopular among Arabs across the region. And this really gets to the heart of our question, Elliot. Who will decide the future of Lebanon? Because the Lebanese people have always had their freedom, their sovereignty usurped by outside powers. Right now it's Iran and Hezbollah, but there's a little bit of history to this. Can you give us just a brief synopsis?
Okay, so first of all, Lebanon has always had a certain instability to it because of the ethnic divide, structural divide. That's a legacy of the French mandate, which ended officially in the 1940s, leaving Lebanon, as I said, structurally divided ethnically between Christians, Muslims, Sunni, Shiite Muslims, and Druze. Unstable for a number of reasons, but essentially the president has to be Christian, the prime minister has to be Muslim, the head of the parliament has to be Druze, and so on. In other words, it's a very, very limited kind of a structure, very, very weak governments over the years, and prone to civil war, which the most recent of its type broke out in the late 1970s between the ethnic factions. To make a long story short, that civil war ended in an agreement in 1989 in Saudi Arabia, what's known as the Taif Agreement, which called for the disarming of all the ethnic groups, militias.
Which included the PLO.
The PLO, no, the PLO
They
by
got
89
chased
was no
out
longer really
earlier.
an issue. Right, they were they were there, but not really an issue. This was the Lebanese groups. Syria had a very, very strong hand in formulating the agreement. Syria, allied with Iran, was backing Hizbullah, and the Taif Agreement, and this is really the critical point, exempted Hizbullah from disarming, saying that it was not really an ethnic militia, but rather a resistance organization fighting Israel. So what happens in 1989 is that all of these militias disarm except for Hizbullah, leaving Hizbullah the only armed militia, officially armed, in Lebanon. And that gives them tremendous power. The result is that from 1989 up until the last few years, Hizbullah has dictated its way through Lebanon, because the fact is there were two armies in Lebanon. The second most powerful army was the Lebanese army. The most powerful army was Hizbullah, and everybody knew it. The result was, because survival is more important than anything else, the Christians who bitterly hated Hizbullah, the Christians of Lebanon, supported Hizbullah. The Sunnis supported Hizbullah. The Druze went in with Hizbullah, because the alternative was Hizbullah went into your village and murdered everybody. Now, for the first time since Taif, 1989, Hizbullah is in the process of being sufficiently weakened
by the IDF
that perhaps, by the IDF, that perhaps, and it's a big perhaps, Lebanon will be capable, the will is there, they're interested, but will be capable of taking control of its own territory, its own country, and ultimately defeating them and eliminating them as an armed force. There are a lot of ifs involved there. In my opinion, President Aoun, who's going to be speaking today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, wants to get rid of them. I have little doubt that he wants to get rid of them. The question is whether he'll be capable of doing it, and whether he will work in conjunction with Israel in order to do it. In other words, there's an honor issue here as well.
This is the big risk. It's always been waiting for that tipping point where Israel has weakened Hezbollah enough that the Lebanese government and army can take that risk to confront it and disarm it. They want to, and these talks in Washington this week were proof of that isolating Lebanon and its future away from the talks in Islamabad over Iran and its future, a very, very good move. But where are we in this tipping point? And what do you expect out of these talks?
Okay, so first of all, one step that was very, very clear and very interesting was that recently, the last couple of weeks, Lebanon expelled the Iranian IRGC people. Now, whether they actually left or not is another question, but the statement was important. We are no longer under your thumb, and this is, of course, a result of the war with Iran. Iran is weakened. It's also in part a result of the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. In other words, a lot of things have happened to fall into place to allow Lebanon a little bit more independent maneuvering room than they've had in the past. That's first of all. Here I have to say, and this I'll apply also to the Iranian negotiations with the United States. Whenever you hear, we're 80% of the way to an agreement, we're 90% of the way to an agreement, what that means is that we've already agreed on all the issues that we don't have issues over. The sticking ones are the last 10%. So what are the issues that will come up with Lebanon? The simple ones. There are about 15 points along the border that are territorial disputes between Israel and Lebanon. They amount totally to maybe a few hundred square meters. other words, they're really symbolic. They have to do with where you draw the actual lines between the British and French mandates of Palestine, Syria. That's not a sticking point. That's one where if you use a thick enough marker on the map, you've covered the problem. I'm exaggerating, but not by much. There's the issue of what is known as the Shaba Farms. Was it Syrian? Was it Lebanese? Again, it's a very, very small area. Peace or war is not going to hinge on that. Israeli withdrawal from all Lebanese territory, a legitimate demand by Lebanon. And Israel has never had an interest in keeping Lebanese territory for the purpose of keeping Lebanese territory. The demilitarization of the area, whether it's from the Litani or from the Zaharani, doesn't really matter. In other words, demilitarization of South Lebanon so that Israel feels secure in pulling its forces back to the border. And range makes a difference here. It's not just rockets, it's anti-tank missiles, it's line of sight. In other words, there are all sorts of tactical issues here that have to be satisfied in terms of demilitarization, in which the only force permitted into that area would be Lebanese police. Now, between us, we know they would be troops in police uniforms, but it means no heavy weapons, no rockets, no artillery, nothing like that. And the disarming of Hizbullah. And now here's where it starts getting sticky.
It's a big issue.
Well, there are two issues. Disarming Hizbullah is one, and it comes back to what we were saying before. Even if they agree, who does it? The Lebanese army, first of all, is largely based on Shiites, so there's an open question. Will they actually follow orders if ordered to disarm Hizbullah? That's question number one. And question number two is, if the answer to question number one is yes, do they have the capability to do it? And if not, then what? And again, these are questions that we don't have answers to. The French saying that they'll come in and help is not particularly helpful.
I don't think even Lebanon wants them involved right now. They want Israel to help.
No. Look, first of all, with France's history, having them on your side is a handicap, not a help. So that's the big question in terms of Hezbollah. There's a second important question, and that is what happens when, not if, South Lebanon, which has been declared demilitarized, becomes militarized, whether it's by Hezbollah, whether it's a clone of Hezbollah, because anybody who thinks the Iranians are going to sit back and leave this alone is kidding themselves. Palestinian groups that are still operating in refugee camps in Lebanon, whether it's PFLP or any of the others, or anybody else. In this neighborhood, terrorist groups grow like mushrooms. And when that happens, who is responsible for clearing them out? And if the answer is Lebanon, which is perfectly okay with me, what happens when they don't do it? If Israel goes in to demilitarize South Lebanon because the Lebanese government hasn't, is that a violation of the agreement, or is that an enforcement of the agreement?
Which is something like the ceasefire we've been on since November of 2024, that Israel
Correct.
is supposed to report violations to this committee, and the Lebanese army is supposed to take care of it, and they haven't, so Israel keeps attacking these violations of the ceasefire. Okay. Well,
That's right.
but we are at this point, I think, the Lebanese in general are fearful of another civil war. And this is why we haven't already had Hezbollah and the Lebanese army, the Christian Maronites and the Sunni Arabs who want to get rid of Hezbollah facing up to them. Both sides, I think, are afraid of it. I actually saw a report where Israel had some indication, Israeli intelligence had some indication. It's one thing when can the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government disarm Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah is not going to sit there and wait for it. That they actually had the planning, the makings of a coup in Beirut to take over there. Are they capable of it?
Yes.
Is that a possibility in the midst of this tension?
it's certainly a possibility, less likely today than it was before. Because remember, the only currency here that matters is power. Do they have the power to do it? But they would certainly like to. Let's also keep in mind something I said earlier, and I want to sharpen the point, and that is people in these kinds of situations, groups tend to side with the winner. And the winner
like
being,
the Druze.
Like the Druze, exactly. And the winner is not necessarily that the side that has won, but rather the side that you anticipate is going to win. And by going with them, you actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Shiites of Lebanon are not all Hizbullah. I think this is also a very important point that's missed in the West. The Shiite world, religious world, political world, is not a monolith. The Khomeinyists of Iran are one group, and they're not a small group. But there are non-Khomeinist Shiites. In Lebanon, there's an organization called Amal, which predates Hezbollah by many years. And the reason Iran created Hezbollah, Amal is a Shiite organization. The reason Iran created Hezbollah is because Amal did not subscribe to Khomeinism.
They weren't radical enough. Yeah.
No, it's a sect.
Yeah.
It's a sect, and I think we should all be able to understand this, no matter Christian or Jewish.
Yeah.
You know, there are those who you follow and those who you don't follow, and right.
The synagogue I attend, the synagogue I don't attend.
Exactly, what I would never go to.
Or
right.
the church.
Okay. Exactly, and the leaders, and this one I listen to, and this one I reject. When you throw politics into it, it becomes that much more, and it's blood politics. It becomes that much more critical. Amal has sided with Hezbollah against the other factions in Lebanon because Shiite identity has its connection.
Yes.
But Amal is not naturally Khomeinist. In other words, if Hezbollah is sufficiently weakened by a coalition that is not blatantly anti-Shiite, we could see Amal go in with the Christians and the Druze and the Sunnis against Hezbollah. That's not a prediction. It's simply one of the complex mixes of Lebanese politics.
Yeah, and the Druze community is small, but they've been kind of split. I think Walid Jumblatt has sided, and some of the Druze side with Hezbollah, but if they start shifting, it's because they see the way the wind is blowing, that Hezbollah is a goner, which would be so good. So you're saying we're close. We're not quite at that tipping point, but I gain so much confidence of where the Lebanese government, the Christian Sunni President Joseph Ayoun, the Sunni Arab Prime Minister Sawa, that they want to disarm Hezbollah, even to the point of talking directly to Israel about it. That is a terrific sign.
Absolutely. It's a terrific sign. Part of it is to the credit of the American administration orchestrating it. Yeah. As I said before, part of it is the weakening of Iran allowing for it to happen, and the weakening of Hezbollah giving them at least the opening of the door to an opportunity that perhaps they'll be able to liberate Lebanon for themselves.
Yeah, Iran hasn't been able to go in and salvage Hamas in Gaza, and they probably can't do it with Hezbollah. And I do think this is a cry of the Lebanese people to President Trump, not necessarily Israelis, just as the Iranian people cried out, "Come and help us." They see him as a figure who can help come deliver them at this historic moment from the grip of Hezbollah, so that the people of Lebanon can decide their own future, which I think for decades it's been known most Lebanese could make a cold peace, at least, with Israel, to live at peace with them. They don't really have that big a gripe with them.
No. I agree with you, absolutely. This is a moment of opportunity. Clearly, dangers involved, complexities involved, but with the proper move and the proper will and cooperation, we really are at a moment of great opportunity for Lebanon, and to the benefit of Israel as well.
Yeah. You did a good job of really singling out the issues they're going to be dealing with, and especially going forward, how will violations of any agreement be handled there in Lebanon. Just very quickly, the ceasefire in Iran has a few more days. There's talk it'll be extended, that there's progress. Of course, President Trump also can, at the same time, out the other side of his mouth, put pressure. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Oh, we're close to an agreement and all. What do you expect out of that? And has Israel, with the U.S., done a good job of weakening Iran in the 38 days that they did fight?
There's no question Iran is significantly weaker than it was going into the operation that began at the end of February. Tactically, strategically, economically, industrially, in terms of command and control, I think that if this all ends with the Iranian regime reestablished and strengthened, all we've done is push the clock back a little bit. And I don't want to predict 3 years, 5 years. This talk of giving them an agreement of 20 years of not developing nuclear weapons is nonsense. They violate agreements the minute they sign them, and we know that, and they've admitted it. They're proud of it. So the only solution from a world, American, Israeli stability perspective is an Iranian popular uprising against this regime. I think that one of the targets, one of the targets in this last campaign was the apparatus of control of the regime. I believe that one of the reasons that bridges were the next round of targeting is to break Iran up physically so that if an uprising takes place in one place, it makes it more difficult for the IRGC and the Basij to move forces to suppress it. Once areas become liberated, it becomes easier to liberate other areas. But once again, just like with Lebanon, different but similar category, will the people rise up is one question, and will they succeed is a second question. Only time will tell. These are not predictable answers to these questions.
Yeah, I do think that the Iranians right now will sign anything with Trump because they know he'll be gone in just a couple years, 2.5 years, he'll be gone, and they don't think anyone will stand up to him again like he has.
They may be right.
Which is probably true. That's the sad truth. And but I've got some preferences and a successor to Trump that I think more and more Christians in America are agreeing with me, but we'll see how that plays out. Needs to be prayed about. But Elliot Chadoff, IDF Major in the reserves and IDF Home Front Command in the North, we always appreciate all your insights and the background and analysis that you give us. So appreciate it. He's on I-24 News, other Israeli channels all the time. I'm sure some of you have seen him, but he's been a regular here on our webinar series. Thank you again, Elliot. Stay safe there in the North.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Always a pleasure, David.
All right, that's our show for this week. We'll be back next Thursday, 3 p.m. for another ICEJ webinar. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us today. Join us again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social media platforms for more exclusive ICEJ content.